Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. Right, so Battlegrounds Season 6, I believe it's Season 6, yes, is about to start. Now we obviously still have the whole mess of Season 5 leaderboards that hopefully we will get soon some sort of comment on from Kabam, but it should not stop us preparing for Battlegrounds Season 6 if you are planning to play through it. And obviously the first thing to discuss is always the victory track, because without getting through victory track, well, gladiator circuit metas do not matter. On the subject, I also have created an Evizone public thread where basically the conversation is going to be dedicated for Battlegrounds victory track. We'll be checking it daily, trying to help you out, guys. Plus, you can obviously try and help each other in terms of rank up decisions or deck decisions or asking about specific fights and stuff like that. So I will leave a link to this Evizone Battlegrounds victory track thread in the video description and in the pinned comment. So if you wish to join that, please do be my guest. It is going to be a nice little nifty place where you guys can again seek advice or potentially help other people and just in general discuss the ongoings on victory track. I will make another thread slightly later on for gladiator circuit metas, and whoever will be willing can join that as well. But before all of that, we obviously need to discuss the meta, and I do think that this meta is likely going to be, unfortunately, a nuke meta. I do basically foresee two different type of fights in this meta. Number one, it is going to be very quick and finish in 30 to 40 seconds, and I'll explain why. Or number two, obviously, you know, the fights are going to snowball down, you're going to eat a level 3, and you're going to have a significantly worse time. I think there are going to be very few in-between type of fights here. And the reason for it is, once you get over your fear of Conflictor, the initial node, then you realize that there's nothing really slowing you down or stopping you. There's no safeguard, no rage, nothing like that. And the other node is actually just going to be increasing your damage output, because when you activate your special attacks, the bare minimum, you're going to get a 25% attack increase on your special attacks. Typically, probably it's going to be 75% or 200% attack increase on your special attacks, which in most cases is going to help you finish fights quicker. And it is going to kind of encourage these final pushes, final rushes, where you just, you know, pray to God that you nuke down the champion, you know, when opponents about 2 bars of power, dropping your level 2. Because often that would send opponents red or something. So I do think that is how this meta is going to play out. I think it is largely going to be quite fast, quite nukey, especially for the higher tiers and for the higher level players. For lower or maybe less experienced players, I do feel that there are going to be more of the fights where you end up eating level 3 because of the Conflictor and things like that. What is also important to note is that this meta on its face also does seem quite Liquid Courage Double Edge friendly, especially considering what I said about the nukiness of this meta earlier on. And then add the fact that Conflictor does purify your Liquid Courage Double Edge debuffs from Defender at the beginning. Now, obviously, the downside is that you would still be taking the recoil damage, and with Conflictor, opponents can kind of force you to throw more special attacks, so if your defenders will obviously be going down quicker, but at the same time, it just would take for one of the champions, you know, for a moment, not be willing to throw a special attack or something, and then your attackers having Liquid Courage Double Edge on as an attack bonus, plus having attack bonus from Arms Race node, would likely be able to nuke down whatever opponents are throwing their way relatively quickly. And because of that, I do expect this meta also to go with our standard set of nuke options, more or less. So let's go over some MVPs and potential MVPs, offensively, primarily some potential defensive things to showcase as well. So number one here could potentially be Overseer, because obviously Overseer is a very bursthy champion who, once ramped up, can nuke down fights extremely quickly. And typically his downside always in the matchups is that ramp up time, when you need to give opponent X amount of bars of power, X bars of power, before you can kind of enter your cosmic damage mode and start nuking opponents down. Well, with Conflictor, you should be able to do that quite significantly quicker, because every time opponent uses special attack, they would get a debuff placed on them. So that will also quite periodically, disable the conflictor, and your parry stance would be landing decent. He has access to taunt, so that there is that, a bit more of reliability of opponents using special attacks. And then in virtually every single match, he will be ramping up faster than normals, because opponents will be gaining more power bars than they normally would. So I do think that Overseer will likely be a quite solid option. Then I do think Scorpion is just going to nuke down everything here again, because yes, opponents will be purifying something here and there, but at the same time they will be gaining significantly more power. Combine that with Scorpion's taunt, the fact that his debuffs, and here is going to be the reason why plenty of other science champions will not work, and more specifically the Power Sting champions. And that is also down to Conflictor, making it harder to apply the debuffs if they do not come in sufficient amounts. Or also the fact that champions like Cassie Lang rely on refreshing stacks of debuffs, like Spider-Man, Cassie Lang, a bunch of others. But Scorpion doesn't. The way Conflictor works is, if you would refresh a stack of 15 Power Stings with Cassie Lang, and if Conflictor would be triggered by one of those Power Stings, you lose all 15 of them. So champions that have a stack of debuffs and you keep refreshing them and reapplying, then those will probably not do too well in Conflictor. But Scorpion doesn't do that. Again, opponents get more power, they will be under taunt, they will trigger more special attacks. So I think Scorpion is going to be very powerful. And I-Bomb, I'm primarily mentioning I-Bomb here as a potential defender, because obviously I-Bomb always carries the lucrative trap of opponent not having a poison immune champion. But in a generic matchup, I-Bomb could potentially also be trickier to deal with, because he himself applies debuffs that get purified, and he will be gaining powers relatively randomly. And then for many of the matchups, if I-Bomb does get to throw his level 2 or accidentally get pushed for level 3, it's pretty much game over. So I do think that I-Bomb could potentially be a cheeky, interesting addition to people's decks. We'll see how that works out. In skill class, it is going to be hit or miss, because most skill class obviously does rely on damage or time effects or debuff application. And there are obviously exceptions that could work relatively well, like Crossbones and like Falcon, for instance, because they do not rely or apply debuffs in their base rotations. We'll see if they are fast enough or how the meta shakes up. So they are both, Falcon and Crossbones are definitely worth keeping in mind. I do think that Massacre could potentially work relatively well with Conflictor as well. Reason for it is because he applies debuffs constantly, non-stop, all the time. And you will have a relatively fast-paced, aggressive playstyle with Massacre typically all the time anyways. And just the idea of having your parries kind of like stick and land at all times should be quite nice. But additionally, I'm absolutely convinced that Kingpin is still going to be a very solid option for Season 5, because offensively, you can play without debuffing opponent at all, just by going to your level 2s. Obviously, if you do trigger Conflictor and then straight after throw level 1, that can work as well in certain matchups that might be necessary. And obviously, Kingpin is a relatively solid defender for Battlegrounds too. And then obviously we have Valkyrie, and she should be functioning just as normal pretty much. And I do not think that she's going to be like the fastest or the best option for a whole bunch of fights, but she has the reputation at this point in Battlegrounds of being one of those champions that does a lot of very hard and tricky matchups if need be. And I do think that she will play a role there as well. In Mutant class, we have Storm. I do think that Storm is going to be a relatively solid option here. And the reason for that is obviously against skills, she would be getting her passive stun. If they purify anything, I do think that skill defenders might come out to play in this meta as well. And at a relatively healthy degree. And then giving her extra attack in combination with her prowesses on special 2, I do think that she would be able to nuke down opponents quite quickly, quite rapidly. Then Kitty Pryde is definitely going to work extremely well, because she, again, does not really rely on parries and doesn't debuff the opponents. And then giving Kitty Pryde extra damage on her special attacks will definitely, improve her fight time. So Kitty Pryde is going to be exceptionally dangerous in the new meta. Then I think Toad is going to be, again, worthwhile addition to most decks, especially against skill opponents, because opponents will be purifying your debuffs, be those parries, be those poisons, and obviously against skill champions and against, champions in general, you will be able to ramp up your prowesses quite quickly there. So this is going to be interesting. I do think that Toad should be working quite well. Obviously, you will have to bait out more special attacks than normal, but I think especially against skill champions, this should be really, really effective. And moving on, we have Omega Red. And Omega Red, again, is a fantastic Battlegrounds attacker in general. And as I am saying with this kind of thought process of this likely being quite a aggressive nuke meta, Omega Red fits there really well. Because whether you run Liquid Courage Double Edge or you don't, obviously he still is a very quick, capable attacker that can take a lot of problem fights. And the upside of Omega Red is that once you build up your initial spores, Omega Red's abilities can and will disable Conflictor as a node, because it does count as purification of a debuff, and Omega Red can work to bypass it. So I do think he's going to be quite important and good attacker. Then obviously we need to move on to tech class. Have to mention Ghost. Ghost, is, again, just made better by this, because with Ghost you do not inherently debuff any opponents at all, ever. Because you do not need to parry to find openings, and none of your hits apply debuffs. And then you do get damage increase at pretty much any point when you're going to use your special attack, and Ghost will work better than normal. Guardian, I think, is going to be a solid addition, and here I'm kind of especially highlighting Guardian again, because in every meta it's kind of worth seeing which champions would be good domino counters, in my opinion. And out of all three that we typically use, I think Guardian would likely be the best one here, because we have Omega Sentinel and Nimrod typically are go-to domino counters, but both of them, especially Omega Sentinel, will be giving Domino a lot of debuffs, and then when she goes lucky, there could be quite a lot of evade stuff coming in play, and it could slow you down. Now, don't get me wrong, I do think that Nimrod and Omega Sentinel will both be perfectly capable of killing a Domino. I just think that, especially in case of Omega Sentinel, she's going to be significantly slowed down by the fact that you debuff champions a lot, and then Domino goes lucky, then your parry stuns are shorter, you can't heavy, you need to do full hit combos to pause and things like that. So I do think that Guardian is going to be a very solid addition, because again, on his base, he does actually, no, against Domino, he will be consistently debuffing the Domino. So it is going to be interesting to see how that works out. So I think Nimrod is probably going to be the better Domino counter. But in general, if we look at other fights, except for Domino, where he doesn't consistently try to apply that shock, I do think that Guardian's going to be quite solid tech attacker against majority of the mutants as well, because on his base, again, only debuff he would really apply would be either the level 1 taunt, which is not a big deal, which is kind of something you want to, or ideally you do want to trigger Conflictor just before you drop your level 2, not only to get more attack bonus, presumably from the Arms Race node, but also to make sure your stun sticks if you have enough charges for his level 2. Now, Infamous Iron Man, I think, is going to be an absolute monster in the next meta, to be honest, because he thrives on throwing his special attacks when opponent has more power, right? At the first hit of the Infamous gains 1000 attack rating for each of the opponent filled bars of power. So you ideally do want to throw your level 3 when opponent has 2 or 3 bars of power anyways, in order to gain more damage. And then obviously you will be power draining with your level 2, dealing a lot of damage. And then thanks to Arms Race node, you would be getting additional 200% attack bonus to all of these shenanigans. So I do think we're going to see Infamous Iron Man as a really, really, really good option for a ton of fights, with a very significant damage increase for when you finally do get your level 2. Moving on, I do think Warlock is still going to work very solid, because the one thing that could trip people up in the next meta, obviously, is if opponent does reach 3 bars of power. But as long as opponents are going to be running willpower, you can be pretty much as aggressive as you want with Warlock, and that will not really be danger. And I think next meta, we're going to see significantly different playstyle for Warlock, because in many of the metas, typically we go like parry heavy and make sure the opponent doesn't really go above bar power or anything like that. I think in the next meta, we will be kind of playing opposite. We're going to be trying to basically, you know, keep opponent about 2 bars of power in order to get a massive 200% attack boost on your level 2, and then capitalize on that with those armor breaks, with those multi-hits, with everything else, his high crit damage, in order to deal as much damage as possible, knowing that opponent will not go up to 3 bars of power. So I do think that Warlock is going to be very good and important for the next meta. Additionally, I think Starking and Spider-Man is going to be quite solid, and he kind of fits obviously in that nuke champion category. But the reason why I wanted to highlight Starking and Spider-Man as opposed to, let's say, Hitmonkey is obviously because Starking and Spider-Man does have access to taunt, so you'll have easier time baiting out the special attacks. He does have access to power drain, all of whom will help you mitigate some of the matchups where, you know, inevitably opponents will be using champions on defense that have like Mystic Dispersion and things like that. And Starking and Spider-Man in general is one of those very few champions that deals well with stuff like Mephisto or Rintra or Sasquatch or what have you, if need be. And yeah, I do think he is going to do well in the upcoming meta. And then we have CGR. Obviously, don't need to say much about CGR. Get more attack bonus for CGR for when you drop your level 2. Sure, why not? Sounds good enough, right? And then on top of it, obviously, typically when you throw your level 2, opponent's power is kind of frozen in place due to the Fate Seal and power lock ability that he has. And yeah, I do think CGR is going to be putting in a ton of work as well. Hulkling, just by the sheer nature of him not relying on any debuffs, finding openings through opponent's block, and then again, on top, getting extra damage on his level 2s. Why not? Hulkling should still be great. Likewise for Galen. Galen doesn't really care about Conflictor as such in most cases. Just, you know, get your couple of level 1s in at first and drop your Harvest. Nothing to stop him from that. Now, moving on to Mystic class, I think America Chavez is going to be a very solid option because obviously Conflictor is ability power gain, and America Chavez will stop that. On top of that, America Chavez doesn't rely on any debuffs at all whatsoever. It is important to note also that Conflictor is not coded like Masochism, for instance. It is not counted as a buff expiring, so it doesn't feed MD. If you nullify it, the region is still there, for instance, or if you would be nullifying, so on and so forth. So neutralize isn't going to stop it and things like that. But America Chavez abilities will, because obviously one of her parallel dimensions reduces opponent's ability power gain by 60%. So drop 2 heavy attacks every time you trigger Conflictor. You will be reducing opponent's power gain. Also, you can play America Chavez in a way where you don't have to trigger the Conflictor node at all. And then, yeah, just get your level 2, do damage, and get that bonus attack. So, sweet. No problem there. Doom, again, is going to be about as good as he has ever been in Battlegrounds. Because, yet again, we know that Dr. Doom likes to play with opponent's bar of power. You want to often push them to 2 bars of power or more. So, Dr. Doom is going to be basically completely unhindered. If not, he's going to be helped by all of these nodes, because Conflictor even can and often does work in favor of Dr. Doom to push opponents to higher power, then letting Doom steal more power whilst his aura is active or with his level 1. And then on top of it, obviously, you often and typically throw your either special 2s or special 3s when opponents are at 2+ bars of power, which will give you very notable damage increase, which will carry on to your incinerates and so on and so forth. So Dr. Doom is going to be crazy good for this next meta. And then it's again worth pointing out Claire. In this case, I definitely want to go to her special 2, because on her special 2 she does have Power Steal, right? And effectively with Claire, I suspect that you will be able to pretty much play her in a manner where you just continuously throw your level 2s with 200% attack increase, keeping opponent in between 2 to 3 bars of power, and stealing as much power back as possible. And having a massive attack increase on your special attack. So for this meta, I kind of wish I had rank 4 Claire, because in theory she sounds really, really powerful. And the final champion, obviously Juggernaut. Juggy is still going to work a treat, because he doesn't have to debuff opponent at all. Just giving him more special attack damage. It's going to be sweet. Juggernaut's going to work well. And that's kind of like the upside of this meta, because I love playing Juggernaut. So obviously, you know, champions like Human Torch and Archangel are still going to be great. They're like the staples, you know, at this point, I'd pretty much only mention Human Torch and Archangel at the beginning of the video if they don't work. Because they always do, and they always nuke down stuff. So that is more or less what I think is going to happen in the next meta. Those are some of the champion suggestions. I'm sure there are more. I'm sure there will be more great champions. There's somebody always overlooked. There are some champs that, you know, I might not think right now will work out, but will work out when it actually comes to playing it. Nobody can be perfect. Nobody can see or predict everything. But as I said, looking at the nodes, it does look like a very fast-paced meta where things can either go really well or horribly wrong at the span of a couple of hits. I do think it is relatively Liquid Courage Double Edge friendly. I don't think it will be a must to run Liquid Courage Double Edge, because there are obviously always upsides and downsides to everything. I do think the only week when it would be silly not to run Liquid Courage Double Edge is when we saw the fisticuffs. But I think that is in one of the next seasons. Yeah, that is week 3 in season 7. That meta will definitely be Liquid Courage Double Edge Glare Circuit meta. I think in this one you can do with and without, up to you. And yeah, let me know if you have any more questions. Again, you can check out that link that I will leave for Battlegrounds Victory Track episode. And see you there. Bye. Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about the next